The neighborhood was the epitome of suburban tranquility, a place where front porches served as gathering spots for families and the sounds of children playing filled the air. Well-kept lawns and blooming flower beds showcased residents' pride, while community events, barbecues, holiday celebrations, and book clubs fostered a sense of belonging. The Homeowners Association (HOA) was an integral part of this idyllic setting, tasked with upholding regulations that ensured both safety and aesthetics. Its members took their duties seriously, believing they were safeguarding the character of their community. Most residents respected the HOA's rules and appreciated the structure it provided. Among them was Sarah, the expectant mother at the heart of this story, who had always embraced the close-knit community vibe. With neighbors who often dropped by to lend a hand or share a cup of coffee, she felt well supported in her journey to motherhood. As her delivery date approached, excitement hung in the air, punctuated by shared stories and suggestions from friends about the intricacies of childbirth. However, beneath the surface of this charming neighborhood lay a strict adherence to security protocols that some residents underestimated. The HOA had implemented measures to keep the neighborhood safe, including a security gate that controlled access. While this was intended to protect residents, it also introduced an element of bureaucracy that could prove cumbersome in emergencies. On that fateful day, as Sarah's contractions began rapidly intensifying, her husband dialed for help, anxious yet hopeful that they would reach the hospital in time. Little did they know that one critical aspect of their well-guarded neighborhood could swiftly turn an ordinary afternoon into a nightmare. As the ambulance pulled up to the security gate, flashing lights cutting through the late afternoon sun, it encountered a barrier not of metal but of policy. The guard stationed at the gate did his job with steadfastness, illustrating how rules designed for safety could ultimately erode the urgency required in life-and-death situations. Unbeknownst to those inside, this decision would have dire consequences that would forever change the fabric of their community. As the afternoon light began to dim, Sarah felt an unexpected surge of pain that jolted her awake from a peaceful afternoon nap. She had planned everything meticulously. Her due date was still days away, and she had envisioned a smooth transition into motherhood filled with moments of excitement and calm. Instead, the first signs of labor came as a shocking twist in what had been an otherwise serene day. A sense of urgency washed over her immediately, sparked by sharp contractions that seemed to come out of nowhere. Her husband, Mike, rushed to her side, his face etched with concern as he watched the transformation from excitement to panic unfold. "It's too early," he exclaimed, trying to calm both her and himself as they began gathering essentials for their trip to the hospital. Their living room, usually a place of laughter and warmth, was now filled with frantic activity as they packed bags and double-checked their birth plan. Meanwhile, the couple's neighbors, who had grown close over shared community events and late-night chats, sensed the tension radiating from their home. Some had already arrived at their door before Mike could even gather his wits to call for help. When he finally dialed 911, every second felt like an eternity. Each contraction reminded them just how precious time was. The moment the ambulance dispatched was fraught with hope. In those fleeting minutes while anticipating help, they clung to visions of their future, their new arrival, tiny fingers grasping at their hearts. But as Sarah breathed through each contraction, fear began to seep in. The story was quickly turning into something far less predictable than they had anticipated. Desperation set in when Mike heard sirens approaching in the distance. He stepped outside with hope, but was met instead with heartbreak as the sounds faded around the neighborhood perimeter. Each tick of the clock amplified their worry. What should have been a crucial moment race against time was swiftly becoming a nightmare marked by uncertainty and dread. Little did they know it would soon spiral beyond anything they could have imagined. As the distant sound of sirens grew closer, hope filled Mike's heart. He rushed to the front of the house, anxiously glancing down the street, only to see the ambulance finally turning onto their block. Relief washed over him until he reached the HOA security gate. The unmistakable red and white lights pulsed against the backdrop of a setting sun as he watched the ambulance come to a halt. The guard at the gate, a man known for his unwavering adherence to protocols, stepped forward with his clipboard in hand. As Mike approached, desperation etched across his features. He heard the guard speaking into his radio. "I need verification," he said firmly. "The paramedics aren't on the authorized entry list." "What do you mean they're not on the list?" Mike interjected, urgency rising in his voice. "This is an emergency. My wife is in labor." But the guard remained resolute, flipping through pages of regulations while reiterating that each ambulance needed prior clearance from the HOA for entry, a policy designed to maintain security but now threatening lives. The seconds ticked away. Every moment felt like an eternity as Mike fought back frustration and fear. Inside the ambulance, paramedics were equally bewildered, aware that their response time was dwindling ominously. They called into dispatch for verification while maintaining readiness, acutely aware that time was not on their side. All they could do was wait, exchanging glances that spoke volumes about their growing concern and frustration regarding this protocol. The atmosphere shifted from a sense of hope to one of impending dread. Mike's eyes darted between the guard and the approaching ambulance as he urged for someone, in any position, to recognize the urgency of their situation and act decisively. Neighbors began gathering at a distance, watching with bated breath as this absurd scenario unfolded. Underneath their collective worry lay a grim realization. What should have been a straightforward emergency response was caught in a bureaucratic web woven by safety policies that underestimated human lives, the very lives they had thought were protected within their tightly controlled community. As minutes dragged on like hours, it became painfully evident that this adherence to rules would soon have catastrophic consequences for Sarah and her baby. With each passing second, the tension escalated at the security gate, where the guard remained steadfast in his duty while Mike's urgency mounted. The ambulance crew, their patience already frayed, attempted to clarify their access through the radio dispatch. "We're here for a critical patient in labor," one paramedic stated over the crackling line, hoping to cut through the bureaucratic fog. "Please confirm our authorization." Inside the cab of the ambulance, frustration bubbled as they learned from dispatch that there had been an error regarding their listing on the HOA's authorized entry list. "This isn't just a routine call. We need access now," another paramedic shouted, his voice laced with urgency as he glanced at his partner and then back at Mike, who was pacing anxiously outside. The guard's authoritative stance seemed unyielding, despite Mike's desperate gestures toward the house. "I understand it's an emergency," he replied coolly, "but I have to follow protocol." Unbeknownst to him, every moment spent deliberating felt like a lifetime to those inside Sarah's home. He flipped through pages of regulations but found no quick solution. As he repeated his mantra of safety compliance, Mike's frustration turned into desperation. "Can't you see this is life or death?" he implored again, gesturing toward the house where Sarah was enduring intense contractions. Each wave of pain she experienced echoed through Mike's heart like a ticking clock, time slipping away with every breath. Meanwhile, the paramedics exchanged rapid looks of disbelief and concern as they maintained contact with dispatch. "We're being held up by a security policy that could cost this woman her life," one muttered under his breath. Neighbors began murmuring among themselves, sharing glances filled with disbelief and anger. They could feel something was amiss. This should have been a straightforward medical response, but instead became an agonizing standoff dictated by policy rather than compassion. Finally resolving to take action on their own terms, one of the paramedics stepped out of the ambulance and approached Mike. "Let me speak with him directly," he said firmly. But as they approached the guard together, it became clear that even this decision would not come without its own complications in a situation spiraling toward tragedy. Inside the house, the atmosphere was charged with a palpable sense of urgency and fear as Sarah fought through the waves of labor pain. Each contraction gripped her body like a vice, sending sharp jolts of discomfort that echoed in her breaths. The once warm and inviting living space had transformed into a scene of tension. Family and friends hovered nearby, exchanging anxious glances as they heard her cries, each sound amplifying the anxiety that settled in their hearts. Mike paced feverishly between the front door and their bedroom, trying to maintain some semblance of calm while every cell in his body screamed for action. He hated feeling powerless, caught between waiting for help and watching Sarah endure unimaginable pain. The contrast between their expectations of this moment, a joyous transition to parenthood, and the reality they faced now felt like a cruel twist of fate. "Hold on, honey, help is on the way." Mike called reassuringly from the doorway, but his voice carried an edge of desperation that only heightened everyone's concern. Sarah, pushing through another contraction, looked up at him with wide eyes filled with both pain and fear. I can't do this alone," she gasped, clutching the sheets tightly as her body tightened involuntarily. In the background, neighbors whispered among themselves, exchanging worried looks and regretting their inability to act meaningfully while standing outside helplessly. They could feel Sarah's distress radiating beyond the walls. It gnawed at their chests and transformed shared concern into a collective anxiety they couldn't shake off. A family member tried to soothe Sarah by rubbing her back but struggled to find words that would ease her suffering. "Just breathe," they encouraged softly. But what could breathing do against the onslaught of pain? As time dragged on without an ambulance arriving, Sarah's breaths became shorter and more frantic, their hope dwindling alongside growing anguish. With each moment ticking by without help arriving from outside, each tick representing a second wasted, the emotional toll within those walls intensified. "Where are they?" Mike thought anxiously as he prepared for what could be an irreversible turn in their lives if aid didn't come soon enough. Each contraction pulled him further into despair while the weight of helplessness pressed down like an unyielding stone in his gut. They were slipping into a nightmare no one could have imagined just hours earlier. As the labor progressed, Sarah's condition deteriorated, the pain intensifying as time slipped away. Each contraction struck harder than the last, forcing her to grip the sheets with white-knuckled desperation. Her breathing quickened, turning into ragged gasps that filled the room with an alarming urgency. It was clear to all present that this was not just discomfort. Something was very wrong. "Stay with me, Sarah." "Just breathe," Mike urged, trying to inject calmness into the chaos, though inside he felt the weight of impending hopelessness pressing against his chest. He watched helplessly as she writhed in agony, overwhelmed by the fear that help might never arrive in time. Each minute felt like an eternity. "Where are they?" he thought, frustration mingling with dread. His mind raced with thoughts of what could happen next, images surfacing unbidden of complications that would forever change their lives. Family members shifted restlessly around him, exchanging increasingly worried glances as they witnessed Sarah's escalating distress. One cousin tried to hold Sarah's hand, but her grip was weak as she gasped through another contraction that seemed to stretch on indefinitely. "You have to push," they urged, but Sarah shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes. I can't do this without a doctor. I need help." The sense of panic heightened as neighbors outside continued to murmur about what they could do to assist, wanting desperately to break the barriers between them and the crisis unfolding within the home. At that moment, every second lost felt like stolen hope, the weight of their combined worry thickening the air as time dragged on unrelentingly. As another wave of pain swept over her, Sarah instinctively cried out, and Mike felt a cold chill run down his spine at the sound. It was visceral, a raw cry for help that echoed in the hearts of everyone present, amplifying their collective anxiety and helplessness. If only the ambulance would arrive, if only someone would give them some decisive action. Inside, amid the growing turmoil and despair, a terrifying realization dawned upon them. This wasn't just about delivering a baby anymore. Sarah's life, and that of her unborn child, was now hanging in the balance, and their frantic hopes were becoming increasingly distant shadows against the looming reality of a nightmare they never imagined would come true. The atmosphere in the hospital was starkly different from the chaos that had engulfed Sarah's home. The sterile scent of antiseptic filled the air as Mike paced nervously in the waiting area, his heart pounding with a mixture of hope and dread. Family members gathered around him, their faces etched with concern and sorrow, each minute that passed weighing heavily on their spirits. The reality of the situation loomed over them like a dark cloud. When the doctor finally emerged, Mike felt an icy grip seize his heart. He could see it in the doctor's eyes, an expression that spoke volumes without uttering a single word. "I'm sorry," the doctor began gently, but those two words were enough to shatter whatever fragile hope remained within Mike's chest. "We did everything we could, but—" His voice trailed off as he glanced down, unable to continue. Time seemed to freeze as Mike struggled to comprehend what he had just heard. The world around him faded away. All he could hear was the pounding of his own heartbeat echoing in his ears. It felt surreal, as if he were watching an unimaginable tragedy unfold from afar rather than experiencing it firsthand. "Can I see her?" he finally managed to ask, his voice cracking under the weight of despair. The doctor nodded somberly and led him down the corridor toward a quiet room away from the bustle of nurses and patients. Stepping inside, Mike's breath caught in his throat at the sight before him. Sarah lay on a hospital bed, pale and weary, her eyes filled with anguish and confusion. "What happened?" she murmured weakly as she reached for him, desperation evident on her face. They couldn't save her, Mike whispered back, feeling tears well up as he fought against overwhelming grief. He knelt beside her, burying his face in her hands while sobs racked his body, the weight of loss crashing over them like an unforgiving wave. In that moment, all hopes for a joyful beginning to their family vanished into thin air, leaving behind only an unbearable silence marked by heartache. Outside their bubble of grief, neighbors slowly began to gather outside the hospital doors. Word had spread about what happened inside those sterile walls. A media frenzy was brewing, one that would soon lay bare not just their personal tragedy, but also expose deeper issues within their tightly controlled community and its governing HOA policies that had failed them when it mattered most. As news of the tragedy rippled through the neighborhood, a profound sense of sorrow and outrage gripped the community. The once vibrant atmosphere, characterized by friendly waves and shared smiles, became thick with grief. Neighbors gathered in clusters, voices hushed as they processed the heartbreaking reality that Sarah and Mike faced. The loss of an innocent life hung heavy in the air, and disbelief morphed into anger as details emerged about the circumstances leading to this preventable tragedy. 10 minutes too late," one neighbor exclaimed, her voice trembling with emotion as she shook her head in disbelief. "How could this happen? We have a security gate for our safety, not to put lives at risk." Another resident nodded in agreement, his expression a mix of fury and sadness. "This isn't just about policies anymore, this is about human lives." As more people learned about the unnecessary delay caused by the HOA's strict protocols, conversations turned heated. Residents expressed their frustration over a system that prioritized rules over compassion. "Something has to change," said a neighbor who had been close friends with Sarah and Mike. "This community has always felt safe until now. We can't let this happen again." In the days that followed, makeshift memorials began appearing outside Sarah's home. Flowers, candles, and heartfelt notes dedicated to a baby who would never take their first breath. The visual outpouring of grief became a poignant reminder of what was lost and served as a rallying point for those demanding accountability from the HOA. Community meetings were organized hastily. Members called for transparency regarding emergency protocols and questioned whether such rigid adherence to rules had overstepped boundaries meant to protect them. "We need to ensure something like this never happens again," a determined homeowner declared at one meeting, their voice resonating with collective resolve. Media outlets swiftly picked up the story as reporters sought perspectives from both sides. The devastated family grappling with unspeakable loss and community members now questioning the very governance they had once respected. What began as an unthinkable personal tragedy quickly escalated into a larger conversation about safety, community values, and accountability, leaving residents grappling with grief while igniting a call for change within their once peaceful neighborhood. As the community's grief deepened, the media descended on the story, eager to uncover the truth behind the tragedy that had unfolded within the once peaceful neighborhood. News vans parked along the streets, their reporters preparing to broadcast live from the scene, while cameras captured the growing memorial for Sarah and Mike's baby. Headlines began to emerge, framing the narrative around the critical delay caused by the Homeowners Association, HOA policies that had inadvertently put lives at risk. Local news outlets featured interviews with devastated neighbors who passionately recounted their shock and anger over how strict protocols had taken precedence over urgent medical needs. "It's unacceptable," one neighbor stated emphatically during an interview, tears streaming down their face. "We can't allow this to be our new normal. The safety measures should not come at the expense of human lives." Investigative journalists began digging deeper into HOA regulations, questioning the appropriateness of such stringent security measures designed to protect a community as opposed to safeguarding its residents in emergencies. "This tragedy raises critical questions about governance and responsibility," a news commentator remarked, highlighting how rigid adherence to rules could sometimes foster an environment where compassion was overshadowed by bureaucracy. Social media also erupted in response to the unfolding events. Hashtags like Justice for Sarah and HOA Reform began trending, drawing attention from outside the community. People across different states expressed their outrage, sharing their own experiences with excessively strict neighborhood policies that sometimes prioritized order over essential human considerations. As coverage spread beyond local news outlets to national attention, calls for accountability intensified against both the HOA and its security protocols. Advocacy groups began to rally support for reforms aimed at ensuring better emergency response access in gated communities. No family should ever have to endure this kind of preventable tragedy again, a representative from a community advocacy group declared passionately during a press conference. In those moments, what began as mourning transformed into a collective movement for change, a push against policies that had failed when it mattered most. The media firestorm illuminated widespread fears about safety regulations and connected families across various neighborhoods who faced similar struggles. As Sarah and Mike's story resonated far beyond their community, it laid bare an urgent conversation about humanity versus policy in times of crisis, a conversation that would not be easily forgotten. As the outcry over the tragedy intensified, legal experts began weighing in on the potential ramifications for the Homeowners Association, HOA. With residents expressing their outrage and demands for accountability, it became increasingly clear that lawsuits from Sarah and Mike were not just a possibility, but a likely outcome. Questions emerged regarding whether the HOA could be held liable for the delay that cost them their child, as well as for the emotional trauma inflicted upon their family and the community. Legal analysts speculated about various avenues of litigation. Negligence claims were at the forefront of discussions, focusing on how the HOA's strict security protocols failed to account for urgent medical emergencies. It's about time that these associations recognize that their regulations can have real-world consequences, one attorney stated in an interview. By prioritizing protocol over human life, they may have committed a grave error. Community advocacy groups began rallying support for the couple, urging others affected by similar policies to come forward. Many residents shared anecdotes of feeling unsafe or restricted due to rigid HOA rules, adding fuel to the fire of discontent. The narrative shifted from mourning to mobilization, with calls for a fundamental reassessment of how emergencies were handled within their gated community. As legal experts advised Mike and Sarah, the couple faced not only personal grief, but also a daunting journey through the legal system. They could pursue damages not only for the loss of their child, but also for emotional distress caused by witnessing their ordeal compounded by bureaucratic negligence. This isn't just about one family, it's about setting a precedent, a local activist declared during a community meeting, emphasizing that accountability was essential for change. Meanwhile, public sentiment continued to swell against the HOA. Residents expressed fears that similar tragedies could occur if no reforms were implemented. The media spotlight shone brightly on this issue. Reporters eagerly sought updates on both the family's legal proceedings and any changes proposed by the HOA in response to public pressure. With each passing day, it became increasingly evident that this tragedy would have far-reaching implications, not only for Sarah and Mike, but for countless families living within overly regulated communities across the nation. The dialogue surrounding safety, responsibility, and compassion was evolving rapidly. What had begun as a personal tragedy was now poised to initiate real change in how communities approached emergency response protocols. The tragedy that struck Sarah and Mike's family reverberated throughout their community, sparking critical conversations about the broader implications of bureaucracy, community responsibility, and effective emergency response protocols. The rigid adherence to HOA regulations had, in this case, directly contributed to an avoidable loss, reinforcing the notion that policies designed for safety can sometimes become barriers to vital human needs. As community members gathered in meetings to discuss necessary reforms, voices were raised in favor of a new approach, one that embraces flexibility and humanity rather than strict rule following. "We need to consider what happens in emergencies," urged one resident, echoing sentiments shared widely among neighbors who now felt a shared sense of duty to advocate for change. It became clear that the HOA's protocols did not accommodate the urgency of life-threatening situations, which could have dire consequences for families like Sarah and Mike's. The incident illuminated a fundamental flaw in the way communities often prioritize regulations over responsiveness. Many residents expressed how they had previously trusted the HOA's assurances of safety, only to realize that such trust needed to be accompanied by a framework capable of addressing real-life emergencies. "This isn't just about one incident, it's about ensuring our families are truly safe," remarked another concerned neighbor. As discussions unfolded, it became evident that real accountability must extend beyond just the HOA or the individual guard at the gate. Community leaders and residents began to explore comprehensive emergency response plans that included training for security personnel on handling medical emergencies effectively. The concept of compassion in governance emerged as an essential theme. Protecting lives should never take a backseat to bureaucratic red tape. Moreover, the pressure from advocacy groups was pivotal in pushing local officials and HOA members to reconsider their policies. The media attention surrounding this tragedy served as a catalyst for change, framing the narrative around essentials such as community empathy and responsible governance. In this wake of tragedy, families were united in common purpose. They sought transparency, efficiency, and a shared commitment to placing human life at the forefront of community regulations. The conversation evolved beyond mere outrage. It became a powerful movement demanding reforms that prioritize the well-being and safety of every resident, a step toward ensuring such a heartbreaking incident would never happen again. In the wake of this tragic loss, it is imperative that the community not only mourns but also learns from the heartbreaking events surrounding Sarah and Mike. This incident has served as a painful reminder that bureaucracy, while often established with safety in mind, can sometimes become a hindrance to life-saving action. The overwhelming consensus among residents now emphasizes the need for change, not just in policy, but in mindset. Community awareness has surged as neighbors have come to realize that their safety is intricately tied to how effectively emergencies are managed. The tragedy illuminated significant flaws in the existing emergency response framework, particularly regarding how gated communities handle urgent medical situations. Such protocols must evolve to prioritize human life above rigid regulations. Flexibility and compassion should be at the forefront of any governance model. As discussions about reform gain momentum, it becomes clear that implementing better emergency response protocols is critical. Training security personnel to respond decisively in medical emergencies could prevent future incidents, ensuring that families receive timely assistance when they need it most. Workshops and community forums could help foster a culture of preparedness, where residents understand not only their rights, but also the importance of advocacy for themselves and their neighbors. Moreover, accountability must be established not just for the HOA itself, but for every individual involved in decision-making processes during critical moments. Ensuring that all stakeholders are aware of their responsibilities can create a cooperative environment where emergency protocols are respected yet adaptable. The collective grief felt by families like Sarah and Mike's should serve as a catalyst for lasting change. It is a clarion call for all communities, especially those governed by HOAs, to reevaluate their priorities and policies. By embracing a proactive approach and advocating for reforms that emphasize responsiveness over regulation, communities can work together to safeguard lives effectively. This tragedy must lead to transformation, where compassion triumphs over bureaucratic red tape, empowering residents to feel secure not only within their homes, but also during times of crisis. Ultimately, fostering community awareness and implementing informed changes will ensure that such an avoidable loss will never again leave its mark on families or neighborhoods in the future. Through unity and reform, the legacy of Sarah and Mike's experience can lead to a safer environment for all residents.